Where and when were you born?
1930. And where? In Amsterdam, the Netherlands. That's where I was born. I'm the oldest of 4 children. So, being the oldest, you get all the responsibility of the oldest.
The question is, who are your parents and what did they do for their jobs?
Okay, my mother was a housewife, and her name was Ria, R-I-A, but here it would be R-E-A, I think. My father, my father is the one that did all the things that needed doing during World War II. His name is William, or Wim, overseas. He was the supervisor of marine supplies. And in that position, he was that before the war, and he kept the same position during the war. So he was able to help a lot of people by stealing the Germans blind.
Good. Awesome. So what was it like living in the Netherlands before Nazi occupation?
I was a kid. I had dolls. I played with my dolls. I read a lot. I still do. My mother had the meal ready when you come home from school, and my dad would go to work on his bicycle every day. My grandmother lived with us for 17 years after my grandfather died. I was taking ballet classes, and I had planned to be a ballerina.
It's exciting. So what was it like living during Nazi occupation?
Horrible. Horrible. On the first day of the war, which was May 10, 1940, I was 10 years old. And my sister was 7. And I said to my sister, "Yay, a day off from school." Which is typical for a 10-year-old kid, you have a day off. So I said to my mother, "Can we go outside to jump rope?" Because you couldn't see anything that was happening at that point. Yes, my mother said, "You go." I'm a city girl, there were so many people milling about. Everybody was outside. We lived 3rd floor above a butcher. He was outside, and his wife. Next to him was a bookstore. That man was outside. The people from the grocery store that was at the corner were all standing outside. Everybody was talking to everybody. So finally, my sister and I had enough of the jump roping. We went back up. That was the first day. Nothing really, not in our section of the city, was happening.
Okay, so do you know what was going on in other cities?
Yes, I do know, not in other cities per se, but I do. Schiphol is still the largest airport. It's an enormous airport, and most planes from here land there first, and then they go on to wherever they go to. There were paratroopers jumping out the airplanes. It was the largest paratroop jump that Hitler undertook that day. After the war, the city of Rotterdam, which is the largest harbor that Holland has, the whole inner city was bombed flat. My aunt, who hails from Rotterdam, I overheard her telling my mother that limbs were hanging in the trees. That was not exactly a good thing for a 10-year-old to hear, but yeah, you live in the house. So that was that. My cousin, older cousin, sat in a tree with a rifle out of the mid-1800s, trying to hold back a German Tiger tank, which of course was an impossibility. were not prepared to have a war. The World War, the First War was, Holland was neutral, so the Queen had thought that we were going to be neutral once again. And she sent a protest statement to Hitler. Now, I thought, and I still think, that is quite naive, because a man like Hitler would never react to a protest statement. Our men bravely fought, but it was hopeless. However, so after 5 days of war, we capitulated. So then, of course, we had to go back to school. Well, not immediately, but things started to change. Even I could see that as a child. Resistance had started almost immediately. Ground. My father did enormously much to help, you know. So that was fantastic. Of course, he was, somebody squealed. And so my father was arrested. And my mother also was not fearful, never was fearful. My mother went to an SS headquarters. My mother was an extremely pretty woman. And these things help. It really, truly does. So she goes to SS headquarters, trying to get my father out. Had with her a letter written by our doctor, who said that my mother had to be hospitalized, not true, and that the 4 children would be alone. And he fudged my age. He said I was the oldest and I was only 11, but it wasn't so, I was 13. But nonetheless, she goes there and this officer said to her, you know, they were brutal, just brutal, trying to trick people into things. He said to my mother, your husband has confessed. And my mother said, that's not possible. Thank God for that. That's not possible. And the officer slams his hand on the table and said, don't you see that is his signature? And my mother said, yeah, it's his signature, but he cannot confess something he hasn't done. Whew. That was gutsy because he was guilty, of course. So finally, after a couple of times trying to trick her, he said, Frau, go home. He will be home within an hour. And by God, when I got out of school, there was my father sitting in the chair. And, well, we climbed all over him, of course. And promptly, we got scabies and lice, head lice, because these prisons were full of that. So my mother, being my mother, ferocious she could be from time to time, she combed my head with this fine-tooth comb until it was raw. And then she put petroleum on it to kill whatever was new. We heard in Holland that people were being gassed to death. And to me, it's always remained unbelievable that the German people did not know that. If we in Amsterdam knew, how is it possible that the German people did not?
Right.
That's, you know, that has always puzzled me. But anyway, but I went to a Christian school, and our principal came to do his prayer every morning. And the man took such unbelievable chances. He prayed to God to get the enemy out of our country. And we had boys in class that were in the Hitlerjugend. So he took a terrible chance, but he just could not keep his mouth shut. Which I can understand. Our prince had talked to Montgomery, and so did General Eisenhower, and they were not convinced that this Operation Market Garden, as they called it, was going to be beneficial. Well, it proved to be not at all. The Germans were waiting with their tanks, and it were Tiger tanks, which are the worst, and there were over 10,000 soldiers that were killed. They were waiting, they fell into a trap, and everything that happened to them could have been preventable. They had no radio contact, they had no people, they were supposed to come in waves. Nobody came. So,
what message would you like to leave for future generations watching this interview?
Please don't fight. It's not worth it. Nobody wins. And I try to convey, this is why I speak at the schools. I try to convey to people, please, 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 no more war.